Welcome to the First Buck Podcast, where we feature stories about entrepreneurs and the people who support them. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, and welcome to the First Buck Podcast, brought to you by sky'sthelimit.org. We feature stories about entrepreneurs and the people who support them. Today, we're joined by Michelle Parsons, former Chief Product Officer at Hinge, where she led the product, design, and research organization across growth, core experience, and trust and safety. She was also the lead product innovation at Netflix, product lead at Spotify, and head of product and hotels at Kayak. So we've got someone with a lot of experience with us. Today, she serves as the product executive in residence at Product School, where she is leveraging her 15 years of experience to build best-in-class product management certification programs to help aspiring and seasoned product leaders to unlock more success in their product careers. Michelle also serves on the board of sky'sthelimit.org. Michelle, we're so happy to have you with us today. Tell us, how did you earn your first buck?
Hey, Nick, I'm excited to be here. So my first buck, I'll have to go back to it as a kid. I honestly was always looking at how to make money. So a bit about me is I come from a single mom background. And so my mom worked a lot of jobs on her own. She was, I think, had this entrepreneurial mindset that I just observed growing up. And so the way that I earned my first buck is actually twofold. So one is my sister and I would go around back in the day collecting tin cans or aluminum cans. We would just find, we would save them after like sodas we drank or whatever the case may be when we were a kid. But we also go to every single neighbor's house and collect their cans. And so there was this was before recycling was, the thing to do. And so you could basically take these aluminum soda cans to this recycling spot that was like in this like really like sketchy part of town, like by the railroad tracks, et cetera. But my mom would drive us there. We would take these bags of cans, and I think, we could get a couple of bucks for them. But back in the day, we would use that to buy, other candy or snacks or whatever the case may be at the convenience store around the corner from our house. We also loved to sell. I think that my sister and I, we were always just like trying to figure out like how to kind of make a buck and, how to make sure we had money for the movies or whatever we wanted to do. And so we also got really into kind of like garage sales and flea markets specifically. Again, before flea markets were kind of like the indie thing to do, and there's one every quarter, eBay, et cetera. Well before kind of, personal computing, et cetera. But we would basically take a bunch of our old clothes or old toys, whatever the case may be, and we would have our mom, sign us up for the flea market, or, we would post up signs all across our neighborhood for our garage sales. And we'd basically try and almost like market this to an extent, right? We'd make great signs with like great slogans and put them everywhere with arrows to come to our place. And sometimes we would take turns like standing in a corner to like usher people into kind of our driveway. And then these flea markets were great because we would haggle with people. We'd create like bundles and deals, buy a pair of jeans and get a t-shirt for, half off, et cetera. So we were always looking at ways to just like kind of like take the things that we already had available to us and then repurpose those so that we would, we could like help people who wanted that stuff and then also make some money.
I love that, those stories, especially imagining you and your sister, running a two-sided marketplace on the front lawn, selling barely used toys or whatever.
That's exactly.
It's such a great question because everyone starts off as an entrepreneur and they use the resources around them, the skills or the time they have to fill a small gap or a small need locally. And then these small lessons can teach us a lot about how to scale up those experiences. And so let's talk a little bit about your professional career. I mean, you've been so accomplished. How did that kind of get started? And what were maybe the sort of like pivotal moments that help you evolve and grow into more responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I would consider myself someone who's a self-starter and who's constantly looking outward at people who I admire, who have success, who I think have something to teach me, and trying to consume and learn anything I possibly can from these people who are experts in their field or who could potentially mentor me. So the way I got started in my career was actually pretty unique. I actually wanted to become a doctor when I was growing up. I think I spent every single waking moment thinking about that, like to the point where I would even like nursing some of my teddy bears and things of that nature, right? I constantly just like wanted to be in that particular field. And it wasn't until I spent about a semester living in El Salvador, my senior year of college, that I kind of made the decision to maybe kind of pivot just a little bit. I was running some public health education and on-site medical brigades in rural communities across El Salvador with a group of other students. And I was the program kind of lead for the healthcare portion of this semester abroad. And I just realized, like, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm kind of organizing and operationalizing a bunch of these kind of on-demand medical brigades. And I didn't know what this job was called, but I was like, I know that what I'm not doing is sitting in the room with the doctor, which I really wanted to do. I'm talking to patients, but I was getting a lot of energy from it. And so I ended up going at the time into teaching, just because I had spent most of my time in internships for, medicine, healthcare space, et cetera. And so I didn't really have anything else that I was good at, but I knew I could teach science. And so I said I could teach high school science. So I joined Teach for America, taught in Dallas. And then through that, I discovered the power of technology and just like the inequities in such a very personal way in the education system. So I ended up transitioning into a technology role within the ed tech space, but then very, very quickly realized that I loved the fast-paced nature of kind of the consumer landscape. There's a lot more psychology there. It also is just like way more open to a lot of testing, right? Whether that be testing things with your users directly or A/B testing kind of on your websites and apps. And the speed of development is also just so quick. So I am just very rapidly, again, like kind of growth mindset, learner's mindset, grasped onto a lot of these concepts, always like pushing myself into things that I did not know, right? I think that's one of the things that I think was able to help me accelerate my career is one, saying like, I don't know this stuff, but I'm not going to be scared to go and just put myself out there and try and learn it. I think this was a big moment for me when I moved from ed tech to consumer tech. I had never run an A/B test. I didn't even know what A/B testing was. Same thing when I got into product. I didn't know what a product manager was, but I knew that there were pieces of this particular job or career or function that really aligned with me and that really drove a lot of energy and passion in me. And because of that, it fueled me to want to just like learn and dig in and roll my sleeves up. And there were some pivotal moments in my career, going from Kayak to Spotify, where I realized the power of personalization recommendation was going to be critical to deeply understand in order to produce and build experiences that people loved, that people wanted to pay for, that people wanted to spend time on. And I experienced a moment at Kayak where we walked in one day and we had lost like 20% of our traffic, and we thought there was a huge bug, but in reality, there wasn't a bug, but there was a lot of traffic to lose. The reality is that Google had basically created their own travel product and put it at the top of the search page. And because Kayak was so reliant on search traffic as kind of their acquisition tool, we felt it pretty immediately. And of course, we stabled that out, you pay a little bit more and Google wins and we lose and they win no matter what. So for me, that was kind of the aha moment of, well, what can you actually do to build a product that people want to go to, no matter how easy any of these other competitors may be able to copy you and how easy they may be to access. And so that was really the moment where I went to Spotify. I'd never worked with a machine learning engineer in my life. I don't even know that I had even known what that was. I had spent most of my career in the front end, right? I was not trained in computer science or anything of that nature, but I dug in and I wanted to learn. I think the team that I was working with, really valued that. And they wanted to learn from me. They wanted to learn from my perspective. Well, how could we think more of a user first, right? Like that wasn't something they were doing. So just little moments like these where I saw opportunities, I grasped them, and then I leaned in and I really tried to learn as much as possible. And I really tried to bring people along with me as well. So we could all experience success together.
So from the early days, hustling with your sister to working in the health space in El Salvador and volunteering there, becoming a teacher, to ed tech, to consumer tech. Let's talk a little bit about, maybe a moment where you took a risk, either, with a product design decision or even with a budget, and, how you evaluated that and what the return on investment was, and, anything from your stories would be really helpful to understand the context for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the biggest, A couple of things. I think my role at Hinge was honestly a big jump for me as well. I went from a place where I had been at these really big tech organizations, kind of one of the ICs or one of many people kind of building and really, of course, leading teams and whatnot, but not having been like the person to really orchestrate and lead an organization. And so that was a big transition moment for me. And I think one of the first things when I walked into Hinge, the team was about 75 people. So it was a really small company, which is like, I think really shocking for most people because the brand is so big and because when people use it and know it. So I've known that, only 2.5 years ago, the whole company was 75 people and the whole company was really trying to figure out like, what do we do? And so when I got there, the team was really broken up was transitioning into a modality of like two big groups, a growth group and a core experience group, but we had no strategy really. I mean, the team had been focused purely on monetization efforts, right? Like, how are we going to monetize this thing? We have an audience, but we don't have any monetization features. So they had been building all that out. And I think, the team there realized like, well, we can't just keep on monetizing that, improving the core experience. And so that became a big question mark. How do we improve the core experience and how do we really differentiate it? Because if you think about the big competitors that are out there, Bumble and Tinder, like they're number one and number two by leaps and bounds, right? And so they're big, they have bigger marketing budgets, they have bigger brand awareness. And Hinge, number three, trying to figure out how do you cross that chasm? How do you really accelerate growth rapidly when you're up against a lot of constraints and you're up against a really big competitors? And so one of the things that we did, we leaned into research. I think the team was starting to kind of build that muscle, kind of really understand what are our users coming to us for, what are their biggest pain points. And one of the things that we oriented around, and also just some context, this was the middle of the pandemic as well, right? So people are using dating apps more, but there's also it's a really difficult time to think about, how do you actually create on a cell phone, on a 2D surface, something that's going to actually get people to showcase more of their personality, more of their vibe in a dynamic way that mirrors what it's like to meet somebody in real life, right? And so we found, from our research that people were struggling with this pretty dramatically. And it was causing a lot of burnout. It was causing a lot of people to not have success on the app and the cyclical nature, basically, of people getting to a date, realizing this person's not for them, feeling burnt out, deleting the app, a couple months later, coming back because there's no other option, and then having the cycle repeat over and over and over again. And so we realized that people wanted to figure out chemistry. Well, what's chemistry? Vibe. What's vibe? Personality, right? All these things that are so hard to put into a phone because sometimes I don't even know what that means, chemistry, that spark, right? What we started to lean into was, well, the phone does have a lot more features that we're not taking advantage of. Like there's audio and there's video, for example. So how might we leverage these different modalities, these different technology kind of opportunities to help our business and to help bring people to life in a bit better way, rather. And so we basically oriented, should we do video? Should we do voice? There's a lot of ideas around, how we might integrate those into the product. But one of the big risks that we took was that we actually went down the voice route versus video route. One, video was going to be unique enough. There was a lot of comfort with video. And so that was a risk, right? Not going down a pathway that people are comfortable with. You have TikTok, it's pure video. And that was a really popular thing and only growing in popularity during that moment in time as well. And people had videos on their phone. People take videos all the time. What people don't have is audio clips on their phone of themselves. But one of the things that there's two things that really kind of stood out. One was at the time, I was potentially going to go through some kind of a fertility thing. And so my ex-partner and I were looking at donor sperm basically for our needs. And one of the things you can unlock there was an audio recording, a 10-minute audio recording of this individual, because you don't get any other information. And so I was like, that's very interesting. There is a use case for this. And what I'm looking for here is exactly that. I'm looking for tone, personality. I'm looking for mental health. And, I'm just looking for vibe, essentially, to kind of see who is this person when I cannot see because I have no other information about them, no photos, no nothing. And so that was one piece. And the other thing that we realized is that the barrier to entry for voice is so much lower because I don't have to have my room in order. I don't have to be dressed up to the nines, etc. And so, and I can record that almost anywhere, right? I can record it when I'm walking, I can record it on the train, or I can record it when I'm laying in my bed. And the barrier to entry is much lower. But when we talked to users, we had those 2 data points. We talked to users, and I think the common, trope is like, I hate the sound of my own voice, right? Every single person, that's a common thing that we all say. I never want to listen to my voice. I hate it.
Sure, I'll be saying that after this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. And, that was a big constraint because basically, like, the majority of our users said, I will never do this. I literally will never record an audio recording for my dating profile. Like, that just seems way too try hard. That just seems like outside the ordinary. No one's doing that. Like, why would I do that? But, I think because we had a lot of research, because we understood what the opportunity around voice could be, and because I had this just experience in a completely different realm, in a completely different space, that I just like, there's something here. We needed exactly that. We doubled down. I said, let's do it. Let's try it. But let's take into consideration all of those potential pitfalls, right? Like, people don't want me to try hard. So how might we get around that? So how might we lower the barrier to entry and make it feel really safe and comfortable for people to add their voice? How do we give examples to help people understand what kinds of things they could add? And so we did all of those things. And I think all of those different components together made this feature so powerful that it really helps Hinge, I think, really open up a brand new part of their journey and of their story. We grew, I think in that time, we saw like a 30% user growth from that particular feature from launch. It blew up on TikTok. I think everyone at the time had been trying to nail voice too. That's the time when Clubhouse had just launched as well. You remember Clubhouse back in the day. Twitter Spaces had opened up. Everyone was going to do some audio, thing. And so it was funny. I remember this one headline. It was a dating app, but not Facebook or anything else. Like, nailed voice. Like, we were the ones who were able to kind of really nail this. And so we really were able to speak to users in a real way, that they were taking this content and putting it everywhere. And because of that, we were able to fuel acquisition and growth in a very organic way that cost us nothing. And so that was a really awesome, and not only that, but we were able to acquire a new generation. So the app at the time was primarily millennial based, right? A lot of millennial users, but we actually shifted that completely into a primarily Gen Z kind of focus and targeted app, which everyone wanted to figure out how to break into.
Right.
So it all
keep going downstream to fill up the pipeline, right?
Nice.
That's a cool story. I mean, the inobvious sometimes is where all the opportunity is. And I think in an era where you're seeing, obviously, proliferation of video, Mark Zuckerberg was freaking out about not having enough video, watching TikTok, and to actually head back almost into like a nostalgic connection to voice, the way, when we were growing up, you actually had to call, a potential date. You might talk on the phone before you met, and that was a whole technique for, and there's a tone of voice and all of that. And so it's really interesting. I'd love to ask you a follow-up to that. People find true love now, swiping on their phones. How important is a first impression in your research, and what have been the implications, in the product design over at Hinge? But do you think there'll ever be like a Hinge for finding a job? Like, is it possible we get to that level where you could do it in sort of almost a quicker way?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think first impressions are always important because that kind of sets the foundation for, how people are going to observe you. Now, do I think that first impressions should be the end all be all? No, because I think that people can have bad days sometimes, and people can make misjudgments about people as well. But I think what I oftentimes personally try and do, and I always advocate for, and always try and make people feel comfortable, is, you want to be yourself. Because at the end of the day, like, you can go and you can put on a mask and you can put on a facade, but who you are is going to always shine through over time. And you don't want to have to sit in a position or a place where you curated and crafted this version of the facade that you thought someone wanted to see, and then that like crumbles over time. You can't maintain that. You either get super stressed out, or you don't show up in a way that, is aligned with the expectations. And then long term, that has like negative consequences, both for you and for, the person that you're dating, the employer that you are working with. So I do think first impressions are important, but, lead with authenticity. And, that's something I've learned also in my career over time. Like, I used to always show up and I was like rear to go, always putting on like the perfect like version of what I thought people wanted. And realize like I cannot maintain that. I get way too burnt out over time. And so you have to lead with authenticity so that you're able to just maintain who you are and help your superpowers showcase themselves, because everyone has something unique about them that is additive.
And I think you can draw on those personal reservoirs. Those are deep, and you can really kind of fulfill your potential when you're not pretending to do something or be somebody you're not.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to ask you this question about, you just have so much product experience. What advice would you give to early stage entrepreneurs about how to use their product to make connections with people? Like, in not just in a technical software product service experience, but maybe just generally, like, how should early stage entrepreneurs, use their product to make connections with customers?
Yeah, I mean, look, like it doesn't even have to be like in the app. Like every time that somebody downloads your app or signs up for your website, like that's an opportunity to get to know that individual, especially in the early days, right? When you have people who are coming to your service or your site, there's an opportunity to reach out to that person. Like I think people underestimate the power of user research, the power of like trying to understand why people are coming to your service or site or your app, how people are using it. Are they finding value? What roadblocks are they encountering, right? What ideas do they have? And then again, I'm not saying take all these things as fact, but there's an opportunity there to lean in a little bit and get to know that other human on the other side of that screen, right? Or the other side of that transaction. Because I think we can get to a point where everything feels so transactional, or you're fueling some growth that you see early on, but you stop to ask yourself, well, there's real human on the other side, real emotion, real behaviors, real mindsets that can be very valuable and also be championed long-term, right? I mean, imagine if you had an early stage company who reached out to you to get your feedback. Well, I'm going to tell a bunch of other people about that too, right? And so now you have three or four and five more people who, now know about your company, your brand. And I saw this thing that she did, and they've been around for a long time, but there's a story online where, someone wanted to return their dog food because their dog passed away, and they're asking whether or not they could get a refund. And customer service agent said, no, don't donate this to a local shelter, and we're going to also refund you. And then also sent her flowers, right, for her loss. And I think there's little moments like that to remember that everybody is a human, and we're all going places because they have specific needs and goals and wants. But at the end of the day, we need to move beyond that transaction and make things about community and kind of get back there and make things about building connection and love with that particular brand or service or product.
That's great feedback. And it's sort of like that surprise and delight type of thing, but it starts with just being a good listener and really customer problems. So you've hired a lot of people across your career. Maybe what's your favorite interview question, and what have you learned about, building teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think my favorite interview question to ask is, give me an example of a time that you had a major disagreement or a major failure on your team, and who was responsible and why, and kind of how did you all kind of overcome that as a team. And I think one of the thing that this does, to me, it helps me understand that people are self-reflective. I think that self-reflection is really important when thinking about anything, whether they're successes or failures, is having the moment to stop and be introspective. Taking accountability, I think, is also another area. If you have somebody who answers, it's like, it's always their problem, somebody else's problem, then there's like not an accountability mindset there, not a growth mindset there. But I think it's the fact that someone is able to take the time to say, yeah, here's a challenge or a failure that, I overcame an XYZ project with very specifics, shows that they actually did something, right? Because you're going to fail all the time. You're going to fail more often than you're going to be successful, if I've learned anything. And so what you also don't want is for people who get hung up in those failures and who can't move forward, because when you're failing or when something goes wrong, you need a plan B. And so oftentimes it comes from understanding that you're not going in the right direction, aligning with your team on, well, why are we here? Is it that decision that we made? Did we miss something? Whatever the case may be, did we not have enough context up front? Whatever the case. And then, all right, how are we going to mitigate this? What's going to happen next? Right. But so there's a lot of things I can pull out of that question there: accountability, growth mindset, introspection, reflection, and then forward movement momentum, ability to actually like overcome challenges. On the hiring front, I look for people who have grit, who are oriented towards a growth mindset, who are curious, who I can sense have passion. I think that those are things that you cannot teach. I think hard skills you can teach. Like if you don't have every single product principle and fundamental down to the T, that's okay. I am happy to help you with that because I actually think I'm a great teacher. And so I've done this before. Yeah, but you can't sometimes teach just people's willingness and to show up, to be curious, to take in feedback, to apply that, right? To take the feedback and modify that in a way that you're like, oh, that's even better. And I think that is, I've made some bad hires in my time. And again, it's like, you cannot always, sometimes people show up in those interviews and you're like, wow, this is going to be great. And then the facade drops a little bit and you're like, damn, how do I get single for that?
Really learn about that so that I don't, become a victim of the same problem again.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
All right. So a couple of quick ones. For anyone who's interested in product management, what's the best place for them to keep up with trends, changes in the space? Where do you keep up with trends?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly like LinkedIn is my source of truth for right now for content creation. I think it's kind of the best right now in out there. If you're thinking about product, there are a lot of creators out there in the space. So Lenny Orchisky had an amazing podcast. I think is one of the best. Kosh Gupta, he has a newsletter that does some really great deep dives. Casey Winters as well. So those are some of the kind of people that I follow right now. But there's also Product School. I get plug them as well. That they have a blog and a conference out there. And then Industries, another great product conference that I really, really, really love. So those are the spaces that I tend to kind of occupy just so that I'm following the right creators and their content is popping up and they all tend to interact with each other as well. So my feed is just always filled with like interesting case studies or concepts or new approaches or new frameworks. And so I love that. So I'm just someone who loves to consume content. You can follow me as well. I tend to post content as well. So yeah, I always love to share
those resources.
Yeah.
All right. So taking the steps to pursue entrepreneurship can be quite intimidating or scary. What tips can you give our listeners for how to manage some of the stress that comes with maybe taking that leap and running your own business?
Yeah. I mean, I think one is you have to know what your limits are, right? You can't just put everything. And I think when you're an entrepreneur, when you're thinking about starting out, like everything becomes about work. And even just like in my own career, as I've been trying to like climb that corporate ladder and kind of level up, it's always been about career, and you can forget that you are a human too. And I'm always going to hear me say, like, we are people, we are humans, we are multifaceted, multidimensional. So you have to take time to keep your mind and your body, in line and balanced. So that is getting some form of exercise, whether it's going out for a walk, whether it's talking to a friend, just like keeping things balanced, expending some of that energy, getting some good sleep, and then going back and kind of setting a plan. I think the other thing I love to do to create that balance is literally create those to-do lists, create that plan, map out your week on a Sunday. Say, all right, Monday through Friday, what am I going to do? How are we going to utilize these hours, right? I'm going to build in time for personal stuff. I'm going to build in time for work stuff. But again, now you have an idea or a roadmap, right? Even if just 1 week for how you're going to spend your time. And things will change, of course. A meeting will get canceled. You might get sick. My dog might get sick. And so, you have to be flexible to obviously adapting. But I think that adaptability mindset, obviously a lot of entrepreneurs have that anyway. And so it's figuring out how to heighten that, how to create that as a superpower, right? So some pre-planning always helps.
I love that. So plan, relentlessly prioritize, adapt, and then make some space to recharge and find that balance. So, well, thank you so much for sharing these pearls of wisdom with us. So at skyslimit.org, we connect underrepresented entrepreneurs with volunteer business professionals for free one-on-one mentoring. We also provide business guides to all our members and monthly funding opportunities. So you can sign up for free today. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe and share. A special thank you to Michelle for all of her amazing feedback today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks for listening to the First Buck podcast. Don't forget to join the community of underrepresented entrepreneurs and their supporters by signing up at skysthelimit.org. Click subscribe, and we'll see you next time.